Welcome to this weekend edition of the Chiefs, and with us right now are News 5 Chief Luchi Cruz Valdez coming online. There you go. And in a while, we will have Ana Manipawin, one of the Philippine Star, and Robbie Alampay of One News from the TV5 newsroom in Mandaluyong City. Happy weekend! Finally,
happy weekend.
It's a wet weekend.
Yes, very wet weekend. Low pressure area weekend.
Yeah, and it's a terribly wet weekend. Baha talaga.
Yes, kanina grabe, no? I mean, all the flood points. Parang hindi ko alam kung napabayaan na ba yung drainage, di ba? Napabayaan na ba dahil dito sa pandemic, no? I think we really, government has poured all its efforts on the pandemic, forgetting siguro.
Remember kasi India was in suspended animation for 2 months.
Yes, exactly. So ngayon, bumalik sa atin ang basura. And, well, you know, flooding in terms of the flooding. Grabe, no? EDSA, northbound and southbound.
And even Timog.
Camp Aguinaldo, Timog, Mother Ignacia Avenue, Araneta, di ba? Lahat halos, ano? And talagang makikita mo yung traffic talagang, di ba? Nakakumpol sila lahat doon. And, yeah. Wow.
Well, we were talking to Dr. Troy Hepte a while ago. Of course, Dr. Troy some would even say that he's the country's foremost epidemiologist, and he was the author of the country's Philippine pandemic plan of I think this early decade when they put that together. Anyway, now we were talking to him about it, Lina. Some concerns came out to say, hi, and Robbie Lampay of One News from the TV5 newsroom. Some concerns kasi, like for example, pagbaha at pag-ulan, malakas ang ulan, people tend to forget about the health protocols eh. And alam mo naman, pag nasa baha ka at nasa ulan ka, pahid ka ng pahid na mukha.
Hindi ba na push down ng ulan yung virus? I mean, you know,
pag nasa baha ka, lumulutang-lutang yan. And then you wade into the flood waters, and then of course it gets to your hands, and then you wipe your face.
And then you wipe your face and your eyes, right?
So people tend to forget the protocols.
That's actually a constant reminder ng mga kaibigan natin in the public health sector. Diba? It's not just yung aerosolization or the particles in the air. One of the biggest problems talaga is touching your hands. That's what, I mean, panahon pa lang, yan yung payo, and it's really true. I mean, just being conscious of not touching your face is one of the biggest things we can do.
Talaga.
Pag tag-ulan ng mga tao sinisipon. So singa ng singa, pahid ng ilong. Sorry sa mga kumakain na, pero
panahon talaga ng pneumonia yon, no? I mean, di ba? Siyempre, lalo na mainit tapos biglang ulan. Yan yung sinasabi ng mga matatanda, di ba? Mapupulmonya ka, di ba? Yun talaga yun eh.
And then
tapos ang hirap, naka-face shield ka. Tapos there's water pouring on your face. How can no? Grabe.
And then there's a complication na magkasimpleng sipon ka, hindi mo malaman kung meron kang simptomas ng COVID. Kasi magka-sore throat ka, sipon ka, konting sinat, naku, may COVID ka ba? Tatakbo ka ba ng pagpapatesting ka ba? Punta ka ba ng hospital? And then that complicates everything kasi then you might have so many people overloading the health system kasi they're afraid.
Kaya
nga di ba sinasabi nila, again, kaya nga ito, yung paulit-ulit din sinasabi, you might as well just assume that you're there. Kahit mag-negative test ka, you still assume that you've been exposed. Lalo na kung lalabas ka. Anytime you go out, I mean, that's always the assumption, and it really is should what be dictating our activities and our behavior.
And we have Ani Manipawin online from the Philippine Star. Ami, kamusta dyan sa port area? Binahaba kayo? Total, marami namang barko dyan. So,
paligid, baha pa rin. Pero ang pinanood namin yung TikTok ni Presidential Spokesman Harry Roque. Binanga sa pero obviously dito hindi pa eh. Marami siya napanood niya, sumasayaw siya dun sa TikTok.
Marami na siya nagtitiktok. Ba?
Long ago I had resolved not to watch his TikTok. Video
Pero
streamer long ago.
Kasi pati si acting chief natin, sinasabi, we have to dance.
Carl Jua.
Yeah, we have to dance with the virus. Kasi yun ang hinihingan sa reaction tungkol dun sa tungkol dun sa pagbagsak ng ekonomiya natin. Yun ang sagot niya. Hammer and dance.
It's a fascinating issue to follow.
Yeah.
Kasi talagang it's ramping up the trade war between the United States and China. You can now imagine how China, with the American factories in China, is going to retaliate. And this is the lasting lead. The two biggest economies in the world is still in the middle of an escalating trade war, while the whole world is trying to recover. Speaking of which, Abby, pwede na tayo mag-segue.
Oo nga eh. Kaya sabi ko, nagkakaroon na left to dance.
Ikaw na ngayon ang segue,
Pwede
King.
siguro. Kuha tayo. Kunin natin yung
Assist.
kunin natin yung views.
Para mag-layup.
Yes. Kunin na natin. We have to bring in our guest.
Okay. Okay, joining us tonight is Marikina 2nd District Congresswoman Stella Luz QUIMBO. She's coming online just about now. There you go.
Hi, ma'am.
Good evening.
Hi.
Good evening po. Of course, Congresswoman QUIMBO was formerly the chairperson of the UP department chairperson of the UP School of Economics, and that's also why we have her here with us tonight.
Right up
Thank you
your
for joining
alley.
us.
Yeah.
Yep. And the Philippine
Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, of course, everybody has heard the number, negative 16.5 for the second quarter. Now, the Bloomberg economists who were surveyed thought that the mean would be around 9.4, negative 9.4. Now we have negative 16.5. Were the numbers what we expected? And can we expect better numbers considering that we are still on lockdown or some sort of a lockdown into the third quarter?
Well, I didn't expect it to be this big because our economic managers kept emphasizing that their forecast for the whole year would be minus 3.5%, right? So, of course, that's for the whole year, for 4 quarters. So, I thought that maybe it would be like tops minus 10. So, it was also a big surprise to me.
So was this shocking? Is it scary? I mean, how bad is it then? Because if your projection was 10 and it's gone to 16, that's pretty high. That's so off.
Yes. So I guess part of it really is because we're all on lockdown. It's very difficult to feel the pulse
Impact.
of the market, right? I mean, meaning we're all at home, so we don't really know how big a ghost town the malls are at this point. I mean, that's one gauge, right? So how much retail activity you have, for example. So it is just.
Ma'am, but just to put some context in that, of course, we're talking about the second quarter, so that's a period between April and June, kung saan negative 16.5 ito.
Yes.
So what we're looking at it is that that was the worst, and the worst is, or the worst possibly is already over, and maybe it's time to move forward, or maybe we are already moving forward. Is that the right way to look at it?
Well, that's what our economic managers would say, but then I'm not quite sure because there are some indicators that would probably make us think a little bit more about that statement. Like, for example, unemployment numbers. As of the end of April, we've had the highest unemployment in the history, right? Since we started conducting the labor force survey in 1956, 17.7% is the highest ever, right? And that's 7.2 million individuals without jobs. But then, by end April, there were also 13 million individuals who had jobs. So they were not unemployed. They continued to be employed, but they were not at work, right? Meaning to say, they belong to non-essential businesses, meaning businesses that were not allowed to operate. They didn't have any revenues, but then their employers decided to still keep them. And therefore, it was their employers paid for the payroll without revenues, right? And so by now, then you would expect that their liquidity would probably be wiped out, right? So, so there's still a big portion that would be at risk of losing their jobs, right? So there are some nuances with the data that we're not quite sure what's happening at this point. So honestly, for me, it can go either way. I'm not sure that this is the bottom of it. It's unclear. That's number one. And number two, it also depends on how much interventions that the government would put in at this point in time. I think that's very,
Ayun.
very
But
important.
Congresswoman, dun yung tanong ko, how much interventions? I mean, this number, as you said, is surprising and disappointing number of 16% decline came out after Congress, both houses moved on their respective proposals for stimulus package. Was ano ba yung factor in those mga proposals ng House and ng Senate? And are we now saying that whatever was factored in may not have been enough?
So that's right. No, so before this announcement came, we were expecting a minus 3.5 drop for the entire 2020. So that would mean we would lose the 6.5% that we were expecting before COVID happened. And in addition, we would lose another 3.5. In other words, a total of 10 percentage points. And every percentage point is equivalent to 200 billion pesos in GDP.
Okay.
So more or less, we were expecting a loss of 2 trillion pesos. But since yesterday, I think according to Sec Chua, the newest forecast for the entire year is no longer minus 3.5, but rather minus 5.5.
5.5.
In other words, we're going to lose another 2 points.
2%.
So which means that's about 2.4 trillion pesos. Right? So what we're saying, how much of a stimulus do we need? So it really depends on what we call the multiplier, like how in short, how effective every peso of government spending is to spur business activity everywhere else. And so in other words, if you need to avert a loss of, let's say, 2 trillion pesos, you divide that by the multiplier, say 1.53. Meaning to say, for every 1 peso that government puts in, that would spur activity in other sectors. And the total outcome would be an addition of 1.53 in GDP. So that's what the 1.53 multiplier means. So basically, if you need to avert a loss of 2 trillion, you divide that by the multiplier, you get 1.3 trillion pesos. And so that was the basis for our economic stimulus proposal. So we said we need 1.3 trillion pesos to avert a loss of 2 trillion. However, this thing happened yesterday. So which means with the losses possibly reaching 2.4, then what we would need now is 1.56. So there's one-to-one correlation, right? If we have a worsening COVID situation, and then therefore the economic damage is going to be bigger, right? And therefore the economic stimulus required to avert that loss is also going to be bigger.
Okay, but Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Carl Chua has said that it's actually not fundable. Where do you expect to get that amount? Indeed.
So right now, I've been tracking the loans that the government has been taking out. Last time I checked, it's already 1.7 trillion pesos. So I think realistically, that's going to be the biggest source of financing for any economic stimulus that government is going to undertake. And remember, our credit rating has been improving, which means we are credit worthy, right? So which means if all countries in the world would have to take out loans, we would be prioritized because our credit rating is good. And of course, the best time to use your improved credit rating is now. It's not only
It's when you need it. Except that Secretary Dominguez thinks it's not quite affordable, assuming especially that COVID is not going to end by year end.
Well, that was also my take. No, when they did the presser yesterday, I think he likened the situation to a boxing match. And he says stamina is important. So I guess even if we've been taking out huge amounts of loans, I think what they're thinking of really is making sure that they have enough, given that there is uncertainty in the length of this episode, because they keep thinking about the vaccine ending this whole pandemic. I mean, I think that's their mentality. But if you ask me, I think maybe an alternative would be to take a more proactive approach in controlling the pandemic, right? So maybe an alternative would be to try to fix the number of rounds in a boxing match, right? I mean, meaning if you have a more proactive strategy in controlling the pandemic, I think then in which case that's exactly, then we can go for the knockout sooner rather than later.
Congresswoman, with all this bad news now, there's discussion on how quickly countries can recover, and there's some debate about this. Some are saying we will be recovering quite slowly. On the other hand, there are people like Congressman Salceda saying that we are pretty resilient. The economy is resilient. We have strong macroeconomic fundamentals. What do you think of our chances of recovery?
Well, I won't disagree with Kong Salceda that we have strong macroeconomic fundamentals. Our BSP is a very proactive BSP, and based on most indicators, they're really in control of the monetary system. So I would agree with Kong Joey on that. But I'm not sure I would completely agree that we are a very resilient economy, because clearly resilience has also to do with the amount of social protection that we are able to give. Like, for example, we don't even have an unemployment insurance program, right? In many countries, even in the ASEAN, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, they have national unemployment insurance programs. Meaning to say now that there's a general economic downturn, their workers are protected. Here in the Philippines, of course, we have the GSIS as well as SSS, but the unemployment benefits are really very limited. Like if you're an SSS member, I think you would get 10,000 pesos for 2 months. I mean, which is probably
depending on income,
right? So yes, plus social protection is also PhilHealth, right?
Yes, right.
So, Congresswoman, how much faith do you, Congresswoman, how much faith do you put in Build, something to help us out of this recession? On the one hand, as they say, public spending, particularly infrastructure, has a great multiplier effect. On the other hand, yesterday we just had the JC Pulumbayan and also some of our former colleagues at the School of Economics in UP have been skeptical, pointing to the track record of Build, in particular, saying that absorptive capacity doesn't seem to be there. Even in normal times, Build doesn't seem to be really that efficient, and we are still underspending. How much faith do you have in the infrastructure push and in Build to actually have an effect on our recovery?
I guess the best thing to do is to look at the data. And yesterday, when our economic managers did the presser, they showed a slide which indicated that the top contributors to decline. Number one is consumption. The contribution is minus 10.7 percentage points. The second is construction, which is minus 5.5 points. So this clearly shows that construction really has a very big multiplier, right? So I was talking about the multiplier of 1.53 earlier, but for construction, it is between 3 to 4. So it's a very productive sector in a sense that it is able to really generate jobs, right? So that's a nice thing about construction. But the multiplier works both ways. If you put in more money into construction, it can multiply that, right? Just like the loaves in the Bible, right? But if you're not putting in money into it, or if you're stopping activity in that sector, then that means that the negative effect of that is also going to be magnified. Right? So it's like a double-edged sword. So which is why,
Congresswoman, just to clarify, I don't think anybody, even the people who are skeptical with Build, are arguing against construction. I think what they're what they're pointing to is even the decline in the construction sector, most of that is about the private sector. And when it comes to the public projects, the public sector, what they point to is the inefficiency. I guess that's the question. If we're going to put our faith in build, and government is really pushing this as the flagship thing to bring us out of this recession, how do we address the inefficiencies in build?
But I think even the public sector infrastructure projects are built by private contractors.
Private firms, yes.
So
Yes.
I guess what you're pointing at really would be leakages. Like the allegation would be either more leakages in the public sector compared to the private sector, possibly. But it's an empirical question, right? But I mean look. We have economic managers saying that economic stimulus is unfundable, right? But our construction projects are already in the pipeline. They've been approved by Congress. There are funds available for that. There are appropriations available for that. Presumably, the cash is also available. If we check the Treasury reports, the cash would be available. So why don't we just use it now so that jobs can be created? Right now, that you have 7.2 million individuals without jobs, and that might increase. You might as well continue with activities that would have funding readily available. So, I mean, that's where I'm coming from.
Well, Congresswoman Kimbo, we just need to go into a break, so we do hope that you can stay with us for a few more minutes. We will just go into a break, so please stay with us.
All right.
Welcome back to the Chiefs. We continue our conversation with Congresswoman Stella Quimbo. Congresswoman, can you hear us
Hello.
clearly?
Yes, clear.
Yes, I want to follow up on what you said earlier. You were talking about unemployment insurance in other countries. Are you planning to propose this in Congress?
I have actually filed a bill that seeks to create a national unemployment insurance program. So again, the purpose really is for situations like this, where we have a general economic downturn, we have massive layoffs, and separation from work would all be involuntary. So at this point in time, you don't want consumption of your workers to just all of a sudden substantially be reduced, right?
Ma'am,
So
just to clarify, you filed it in this session or in the previous session? I mean, you filed it in relation to the
this session.
or before? Oh, this session, okay.
Yes, so it was really inspired by the pandemic, realizing again that whatever unemployment programs we have at this point are not really big enough so that it can insure against massive layoffs. And so I thought that now is the time to introduce this kind of a national program. And in addition to protecting, ensuring that consumption levels are maintained. The other also would be support for job search, because of course there are costs associated to looking for jobs, right? You need transportation, you need, of course, your cell phone load, you need like all of these documentary requirements, you need training. So that's actually part of the unemployment benefits that one would receive under my proposed bill.
Yes, but most Filipinos may not be familiar with unemployment insurance. Tell us about it. How does it work? Do you have monthly contributions and then you get something in return if you lose your job? Is that the way it works? Parang PhilHealth.
I know, I was about to say, I know it's a bad time to use that example. It might ruin the name of insurance.
I just had to bring it in.
I know. But then yes, I hate to use that example, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, that's the easiest way to explain it. It's like PhilHealth. In other words, you put in a small premium contribution every month, and that's going to be shared. But in my proposal, the premium contribution would be shared not only by the employee and employer, but also by government. In other words, government is part of it. And so with that monthly contribution, that protects you against risk of job loss. Of course, if that job loss it's involuntary, meaning it's not, you didn't leave your
Not a resignation.
Something else. Yes, it's not a resignation. So it works almost like PhilHealth, except that you are protecting risk against job loss rather than protecting the risk of illness. But it works almost the same. And so you have to pay basically your contributions every year. And in my proposal, however, the amounts are not very big because the risk of job loss without a pandemic is not really big. It's between 5 to 6%. So for a minimum wage earner, that would mean about 40 pesos per month, and that would entitle you. Yes, that would entitle you to 3 months worth of 80% of your basic salary, and for a maximum of 3 months. Yes.
Uh-huh.
So, you did the numbers already on this. So it's feasible that you, with 40 pesos per month, you can get 80% for 3 months.
That's for minimum wage workers. And of course, this is based on your income. So for people like you, of course, you'll have to pay more, right?
Minimum wage ka
So I did the numbers.
Ed, magsabi ka ng totoo, ha? Huwag ka magpaka-image dyan.
Okay, but pag-asuman, total, kahit binring up niya naman ang PhilHealth, tanongin namin kayo tungkol sa PhilHealth. Very basic question. Ano bang gagawin natin dito? And as an economist and somebody who understands the systems here as well, could you qualify for us all the terms that they're being bandied about? I mean, bankrupt daw, nauubusan daw ng pera, kailangan daw ng magdag ng bagong pera. Where do we stand actually? And at the same time, what are some terms that probably disabuse people use it?
Well, first of all, okay, so I've actually been watching PhilHealth since it was here. And I actually wrote my dissertation on PhilHealth. So I've been following it for decades. And so when I heard the news that actuarial life is down to 1 year, I was very concerned. So I checked the news reports, etc., and I found out that exactly 11 months ago, Secretary Duque made a pronouncement before the Senate saying that actuarial life was 10 years. So in my head, how could it drop from 10 years to 1 year, all in 11 months because of the pandemic? Of course, the pandemic is our biggest health crisis ever. But then the question is, did we really need that much money for that? And so when I did the math, it would seem that their projections for expenses relating to COVID were just bloated. And so that was what I was trying to elicit from the committee hearing. And so I don't think it's 1 year, right? I'm not gonna guess on how many years that would be, but it's certainly not dying, right? So that's one. And then number two, what can we do? I think that's the question of Robbie. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
Hello?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Good now.
Are you still there? Ayan.
Yeah,
So,
you're
so
right.
I think Robbie's question was, what can we
Yeah.
what can we do moving forward? So I don't think it's going to die soon, all right? So I think projections are too much. I don't know why they're doing it that way, but it is what it is. And I worry that when expenses are overestimated, then that would mean there's room for fraud. And at this point in time, this is the worst time to engage in that kind of activity, right? And so, what can we do moving forward? I think that, first of all, I think health insurance is a very technical problem, meaning to say, among all government agencies, that's probably the most technical one. And I would venture to say it's even more technical than running BSP. So, in other words, I think that whoever leads it must be qualified for the job, meaning what private health insurance companies, what qualifications private health insurance companies would use to hire their presidents and CEOs. I think we should use the same benchmark. And if and we need, in other words, we need somebody who knows insurance. It's as basic as that. And if it would mean having to pay more, then we should pay more. If we're going to pay peanuts, we're going to get monkeys, right? So.
Are you saying basically that Dick Morales should not be there?
Oh, I'm not saying that because I haven't seen his CV yet. I'm just saying that's the requirement. That's the
Well,
requirement.
he was head of the mutual benefits system after he retired in 2009.
Which was what I was
So,
going to
I mean-
say. I do not think that it's a question of competence. I think it's a question of integrity more than anything else. So I don't think there's a dearth of competent people for a position like that. I think it's an integrity question, right? I mean,
Certainly, because anything that's
Yeah.
fraud related. I mean, look, every year, year in, year out, we hear the same stories about PhilHealth, whether it's fraudulent claims relating to dialysis or cataract. We have ghost claims here and there. Now it's fraud relating to COVID.
right.
So,
Yes.
so it's there, right? I mean, and there's really something systemic about it. And my own observation, I could be wrong because I've been watching it since Medicare. I really think you need proper qualifications for the head. In other words, it's possibly management issues, meaning technical leadership over the program, because a good understanding of how health insurance works, and it's nuances, is really needed. This is not like a life insurance company where you just worry about the probability of dying and then you have actuarial life tables.
Right.
This is different. You need to manage your members. You have 107 million of them. They have to be happy. They have to be informed. They have to be on board. And on the other side, you need to accredit hospitals. You need to incentivize hospitals that they should be providing high quality care. They should be efficient. You have to think about how you're going to pay them. Is it going to be case rates? Is it going to be fee for service? It's very complex. It's technically complex. And all of these things, if we don't understand the moving parts, then fraud can happen. I mean, that's just my take.
Okay. Going back to stimulating the economy, aside from infrastructure or construction, what other industries are you looking into to infuse part of the 1.3 trillion to?
Before we go to industries, Ma'am Lucy, I think the most important thing is we've got to bring back consumption levels, because the drop in consumption is really the biggest contributor to decline. I think minus 10.7% is the contribution. So it's really big. Meaning to say, because people lost their jobs, they're not consuming as much. I mean, that's the common sense explanation, right? So we really need to give assistance to households and workers. And so I think wage subsidies for any industry that would be critically impacted by the pandemic, I think that should be number one, even before choosing certain industries. Now, going to the which sectors we need to support, the most critically impacted are tourism. I mean, with or without the lockdown, tourism would be affected, right? Because tourism clearly relies on movement of people across borders. So as long as you have the pandemic here, people are not going to come into the Philippines. So tourism is number one. Our exporters, as well as our manufacturers that use imported materials. Number three would be public transportation, because of course, because of the social distancing protocols, you have an immediate 50% drop in their revenues. And so, but public transportation is clearly very important. If they're not going to make money, they're not going to run. And if
Yes.
they're not going to run, the workers will not get to work. And it's going to be a vicious cycle of downturn.
What's the
right?
plan? What's the plan for MSMEs?
And then,
I mean, if we're going to borrow heavily, diba, we're going to have to pay that debt at some point. So we have to have businesses or investments coming in. Otherwise, there's no money to pay the debt with.
So you just said it so well, ma'am. I mean, the most affected one really would be the MSMEs, because our BSP again is a very proactive central bank. As early as March, they've already lowered the reserve requirements. So there's a lot of liquidity in the financing system, meaning they increased liquidity by 1.3 trillion pesos. So that's the increase in loanable funds. But no one's borrowing and no one's lending. Right, so that's the problem now, right?
Yes.
So the most important really would be to support your MSMEs. Even if you tell the MSMEs, go to the bank and
borrow.
take out
Yes.
a loan. They don't have a bank account. 77% of Filipinos are unbanked. So you gotta do hand holding there, right? You've got to do credit mediation. You've got to connect them to the formal financing institutions. That's one, right?
Congresswoman, I mean, given the vulnerability of the MSMEs in particular, one of the things that Congress also took up, of course, and actually passed on some reading was the Arise bill. We did want to ask you, there is a specific provision there in the Arise with regards to, I don't know if this is oversimplifying it, but basically suspending certain powers and certain probative, investigative, and inquisitorial powers of the Philippine Competition Commission for a period of 6 months to a year. You're one of the principal authors of Arise, if I'm not mistaken. Would you share and acknowledge the concern of the PCC with regards to with that clause within the Arise proposal?
So you're basically asking me if I agree with that particular provision?
Yes.
I don't. I mean, meaning anything. I'm a competition advocate. I came from PCC. I studied competition economics. I taught competition economics. I breathe competition. But it doesn't mean that if I disagree with one provision out of hundreds, I'm going to say no to the bill, right? I mean, it's like saying because I disagree with one provision, I'm going to turn my back on ayuda that we can give to small businesses. This is like burning the house to kill a rat, right? But
as somebody, as you said, who breathes competition, somebody who has invested a lot, why isn't this something that you would have been much more outraged with? I mean, among other things, the PCC is also saying we weren't even consulted, and among other things, the PCC is saying this was inserted after we were called to the House, and there was no time even for us to react. I mean, certainly you are the champion of competition. That's what people ascribe to you and give you credit for. But precisely as the champion, also as a principal author of the bill, are you saying did you do enough? Do you feel to have raised at least raised the alarm and having had a more vigorous debate on that provision? As somebody, as you said, who has invested a lot and who breathes competition.
Whoever made that comment doesn't know how Congress works. Whoever made that comment has to read rules of procedure of Congress, how amendments are introduced, meaning at the committee level or amendments coming from the majority. That's how bills are passed, right? Is there still a fix? Absolutely, because if the Senate passes a different version, there's a bicameral conference. So then this provision can still be amended. So that's, I mean, that's how things work. I mean, I'm one of 302 people in Congress, right? Even if I scream and say that's anti-competitive, that's just one voice, right? So it is what it is. That's how it passed in Congress. Is there a fix? Certainly, and that can happen at the BICAM as well as the Senate, because the Senate has not yet deliberated on the bill.
Okay. Marikina Congresswoman Estela Quimbo, thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you for joining the team.
Salamat.
Thank
Alright.
you,
Thanks,
Congressman.
Yes,
Right.
and now we'd like to welcome our next guest, economist and President of the Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila, Mr. Manuel Leico. Good evening, Professor
Good evening.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Leico.
Good evening.
Good evening po.
Welcome back.
Yes,
Thank
welcome
you,
back
thank
to
you.
the Chiefs. Yes. Well, bibilisan na namin kasi kulang na yung ano. How do we get out of this hole? I mean, everybody, nobody expected this kind of
Okay.
contraction. Kayo, your proposals.
You have 15 minutes, sir, to give us all the answers.
Oh,
Paano umahon sa baha? Yun, basta
I think
Okay.
unang-una, we have to recognize that we are really in a deep hole, and how deep the hole is. I think that's very important. Unfortunately, there seems to be no recognition that there is a hole right now, and what kind of hole it is. Is it? I recall that before these numbers were out, people are saying that it will only be like a few
2 to 3%. Yes.
and then later on next year we will come back very, very strongly. And I think earlier Secretary Dominguez already mentioned that you cannot lock down an area that represents over 60% of our economy and not expect that there will be a tragic impact on our economy. And true enough, it came in 16.5%, the worst in the region. Despite the longest lockdown, I think, in the world, we also have the highest number of cases here in the region. Now, we are in a hole, but then I think we have to recognize who is in the hole and what kind of hole is it. The poor people are the ones in the hole. If you go around the streets of Manila right now, the drivers, yung mga tsuper, namamalimos, no? And when we say 16.5% decline in our economy, what does that really mean? That means trillions of pesos in our economy were lost. And whose pockets did they come from? Those are the pockets of the poor people. Remember, if you dissect the numbers that were shared by PSA, consumption really slowed down. Anong ibig sabihin when consumption slowed down? This represents about 60% of our economy, and true enough, it will pull down our economy. When consumption comes down, that means people are not buying. People are not buying the essentials, and many of them are no longer eating. That is what it means when the economy is slowing down. It's not just a stale number of 16.5%. No, it's not. It means that millions of people are now skipping meals. Now, how do we stimulate the economy back to its vibrant state before the pandemic? Ang gobyerno, for about 2 or 3 months, walang income. No, remember, instead of April, we started paying income tax in June. So the ayuda that the government gave in March, in April, ubus na yan. Whatever ayuda we are getting now is really digging, scraping the bottom. Wala na tayong pwedeng ayuda. How do we stimulate the economy now? I think we have to go back to the basics. We have to redefine economic fundamentals. We can no longer define economic fundamentals in terms of how strong our exports are, in terms of how strong our currency is, how strong or how stable our interest rate is, how stable our interest rate. No more. I think we have to go back to the basics. The basic is that
What are the basics?
the economy. The basic is simple. The economy is stimulated by demand, and the demand has to be met by supply. Right now, gutom ang tao, walang pambili, walang makain, and therefore I think it's simple. To go back, food ang ating number one. I think the stimulus of our economy is food production. And then there's also an opportunity right now. Because of the pandemic, people are not moving. And
Transport.
transport and also technology. Everything now is being transacted online. Everything is being transacted using the internet. Everybody is looking at an app. Everybody is looking at how can we make our transactions easier. How can we make the economy move again while people are working from home? I think it's simple. The stimulus will have to come from, first, food and the technology that will move our economy. I'm not going to go very far from that. Two things, food production and technology.
Pero Professor, aren't all these predicated on the idea that people have buying power, people have something to buy with for them to move forward and be able to enrich the food manufacturing sector, for example?
Yes, that is true. That is true. We need the fuel, and the fuel comes from money. The government has gone out, and I think they are going to borrow money. Now, where will they put that money in? I think they really have to put that money in the pockets of the poor people. Stimulate food production, stimulate technology development, stimulate. I'm sorry. I think education cannot stop. I've been in education most of my professional life. And I don't think this is the time where education can stop. And I think education can continue using technology and enhancing technology that will stimulate our economy.
But doesn't this also mean that you would have to give subsidies? Because for people to have buying power, there has to be some form of subsidy to buy the food that they will need or the app that they will need.
Right.
Where do you get that?
I don't think it will just come in the form of a subsidy. I think you have to give money to the people. Enough money to the people. They're talking about how to stop this pandemic by wearing masks. A lot of people do not have the money to buy masks. You have to give away masks for free for them to wear it. Unfortunately, many of our people are reusing the mask, or sometimes they even reuse other people's masks. It's terrible. Or they are fabricating masks that do not work. So I think the government stance right now should assume the position that they have to give money to the people to stimulate the economy. First, they need to put money in the pockets to enable them to purchase.
Yes.
Professor, pansinin ko lang na you mentioned as you said, food, technology, some other things, education, literally putting money there, as you said. Construction, you never mentioned construction. And as has been pointed out, yes, consumption is number one, construction is number two. It was not just an inadvertent na hindi nyo nabanggit, or what's your thinking about the pump priming and what's your thinking on build?
We have to reorient infrastructure development. We need to stimulate infrastructure development that will be in line with the productivity of the country. Right now, our infrastructure should be geared towards setting up infrastructure that will help our food production, our technology. Right now, if you build bridges, you build roads, kung wala namang dumadaan doon, I think it's good to have, again, the farm to market road. No, dapat clear yon. And I think we have to be clear also what should be our economic plan. And again, I want to go back to the basics. We need to have a very strong agricultural base. We need to have a modern, advanced, progressive industrialization. We cannot continue this model that we allow labor migration, we stimulate labor migration, and then they bring back dollars so that we can buy our food from abroad. But that's not going to work at this new order. This is a new order, basically. The economy is being redefined. Our relationship, our global relationship is being redefined. When Japanese factories left China, they did not come to the Philippines. They did not, because we don't have the infrastructure for that kind of development. But I think for us, there's still enough money in the country. There's still enough liquidity. And I think we can just redirect investment in the country by putting it in food production, in technology development, modernization of our agriculture, and modernization, establishment of our strong industries.
Speaking of labor migration and the new order, we have so many OFWs returning, and they're returning to unemployment. You think they can be encouraged to go into agriculture, since you want to put emphasis on that?
Oh, that will be a hard sell.
Yeah.
We have to reorient. People who came from abroad will be very, very difficult to be convinced that you can go into farming right now. And we cannot convince people to go back to a backward farming. We need to have modern agriculture. We need to have.
What can we do with the OFWs now returning? We have about hundreds of thousands of them returning.
I think this can be the workforce that we can tap for our technology development. Many of our OFWs are exposed to modern technology. Our workers from the Middle East, from the US, from all over the country, from all over the world, they're exposed to technology. So it will be easier to convince them to getting into technology.
Do you agree that we should borrow to finance this stimulus package or plan?
9 trillion, I cannot imagine counting 9 trillion. In
I don't think anybody can.
Hindi naman.
1.3.
1.3 lang. 1.3 lang.
Panahon ni Marcos.
Can you imagine the 1.3 at least?
Yeah. Panahon ni Marcos, we were disagreeing with Marcos, bloating our debt burden to 26 billion pesos or dollars.
Dollars.
Pero ngayon, my goodness, I cannot imagine the heavy load. And also, our credit rating is something that we should protect. You cannot overborrow. With 16.5 contraction, I am concerned that our credit rating may not be maintained. I don't think we can maintain our credit rating with a 16.5 contraction. And then I am amazed that the government has not revised its annual growth or
GDP forecast. Yeah.
5%. It's 16.5%. To bring it down to 5%, by how much should we grow? That means we have to grow for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
But
sir, I mean, just to, because I don't know how these things work, to be perfectly honest, but in terms of, kanina nga yung isang message ni Congresswoman QUIMBO is, kung habang maganda yung credit mo and now yung increases, this is a perfect time to borrow. But I hear what you're saying as well, that given the bad news and the numbers that we're now showing the world, we don't know. So I get the impression is even if government were to change its mind and its stance about borrowing, is this a closing window? And how quickly will that window close?
I think it will close very quickly, but I cannot say for sure when. Remember, when the major credit rating agencies affirmed and even improved upgraded. But actually, it was not an upgrade. From a positive to stable, that is not an upgrade. From a positive outlook, they were saying that they could increase. They could even upgrade the rating. But what happened was that they pulled out the positive outlook and they just assigned the stable outlook. It's to me, that was a retreat from what I thought was optimism on their side. Now they're just saying it's going to be stable. Now, credit rating has a premium. Nobody gets a good rating all the time for nothing. And it's a forward-looking rating. If you have a contraction of 16.5%, and there's no positive outlook on how the economy or how the country can get out of this hole, I don't think we will be able to maintain our credit rating. I was listening to the interview of the secretary earlier, and I think Bloomberg was very concerned. They want to know what the plan was. And I don't think we're hearing any concrete plans yet. I hope the government comes out with two things. A plan to control for real the pandemic. We have had lockdowns. We are now on another lockdown. Unfortunately, the cases continue to increase. I think we have to show that government efforts are now showing results. And I think the economy or the market, not only here in the Philippines, but also outside, is waiting. What concrete plans does the government have to stimulate the economy back to its vibrant, the envy of the region before this pandemic?
All right.
Okay. Professor Emmanuel Leico, Pangulo ng Pamantasang Lungsod Manila and also a noted economist. Professor, maraming salamat po for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening.
Yeah.
And that will be all for this special or this weekend edition of the Chiefs. We hope what is discussed here will keep the conversation going. I'm Edling Open News.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Luchi Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are the News.